Recently, I played through the first Yu-Gi-Oh video game that actually emulated the card game but came to the West. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Eternal Duelist Soul. It took me a few months, and I'd done it with the intention of making a retrospective video on that game, and this video is only kind of that. To be honest, even though I loved playing this game as a kid, it is not very good. Meaningful card acquisition is glacial after the first few weeks of in-game play, to the point I had to start using the password system to acquire new cards at all. You have a fairly limited number of opponents, and you have to beat some of them 20 times just to unlock some booster packs. The actual pace of the game is almost unbearable, and the AI has the intelligence of a toaster. Seriously, the number of times I played Confiscation and saw either Raigeki or Snatch Steal in the opponent's hand when they absolutely should have used it is innumerable. So ultimately, I'm not sure the game is good enough to make a video about. Even though I still like it, I just think if you're going to intentionally play an old Yu-Gi-Oh video game, it shouldn't be the Eternal Duelist Soul. Or at least it shouldn't be your first choice. It should be something like Tag Force for the PSP or World Championship 2011, which is one of my favorite DS games. Now, today, I want to talk about the earliest Yu-Gi-Oh game design in the context of the Eternal Duelist Soul, as I think that's a much more interesting thing to consider. The game was obviously unbalanced back in the day, but I'm not sure we actually understood how unbalanced it was as kids, or at least I did. And I didn't even know what card advantage was when I was a child, so the implications of Yu-Gi-Oh's earliest special summoning mechanics and their value, or lack thereof, definitely went over my head. So join me on my somewhat unhinged rant as I discuss the implementation of Yu-Gi-Oh's earliest design concepts and how, for someone who enjoys being competitive like me, the earliest Yu-Gi-Oh design philosophy is a card advantage hell. Just a quick disclaimer, this video has to assume you understand the basic rules of Yu-Gi-Oh to be short enough to be watchable. You don't have to be an expert, just please don't leave me a comment about how good you remember Judge Man being because you don't know how tribute summoning works. When almost anyone my age, which is old enough to remember the time right before Yu-Gi-Oh, thinks of Yu-Gi-Oh, I'd wager the first thing they think of are the phrase "it's time to duel" from being hammered in the face by the anime and on television ads, or the normal monsters Blue Eyes White Dragon and Dark Magician, the yin and yang of the earliest parts of Yu-Gi-Oh. Normal monsters make up the largest contingent of cards in the Eternal Duelist Soul, and are arguably the simplest cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, as the only thing that matters about them most of the time is their attack and defense. The unfortunate thing about normal monsters is that they are horrible. Beyond their stats, they do nothing, which make any monster that does not have the best stats for a level range inherently worse than the monster that does. For example, imagine your opponent summon Celtic Guardian on their first turn, and then on your turn, you summon Gemini Elf. You can then attack the Celtic Guardian, sending it to the graveyard and dealing 500 damage to your opponent. I want to note here that the damage almost doesn't matter. That is not most of your opponent's life. What matters is that this exchange has resulted in a +1 in card advantage for you. You used a card to remove one of your opponent's cards from the field, and you still have that card, so it could potentially build you even more advantage. This scenario is an example of the baseline for card advantage. The way you win a card game is by getting more value out of the cards you draw than your opponent. I feel like this is something we all understood when we were introduced to the game as kids, at least on some base level of better stats equals better monster. However, tribute summoning is where things really fall apart here. Let's look at the act of summoning Dark Magician, the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense. First, you have to have 2 monsters on the field at the start of your turn, or a way to special summon 1 for tribute fodder in addition to already having 1 on the field. Then, you send those monsters to the graveyard to normal summon Dark Magician, which means now you've got the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense on the board. But what has that actually gained you? Did your opponent have Trap Hole? Did they have Mirror Force when you attacked? Was their set monster a Man-Eater Bug, Hane, Penguin Soldier, Wall of Illusion? Even if they had no immediate response On their next turn, did they start their turn with Dark Hole or Raigeki or Fisher? In almost all of those cases, you have been 2 for 1, and in some 3 for 1, by your opponent simply using one of their cards to deal with your ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense. And in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, which is literally devoid of resources but cards, this could absolutely lose you the game here. You did all of that work for nothing. Now, removal always exists in card games, but I want to emphasize the sheer number of cards I just named, which I think are all not insane to include in your deck in this game. Don't get me wrong, there is a tribute summonable normal monster that's playable in this game, that's Summon Skull, due to its stats being even better than Dark Magician's because you can search it with Witch of the Black Forest, a card we'll talk about later. But beyond that, the vast majority of normal monsters have no real use. But if I'm gonna be honest, normal monsters are not why I made this video. No. Tribute summoning is the least of our worries. The thing that really got me going on this topic was ritual summoning and, to a very slightly lesser extent, fusion summoning. The earliest special summoning mechanics in the game that don't involve special summoning monsters from the graveyard, and boy, are they something. I don't believe there's any room for debate that in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Spell cards are clearly the most powerful cards in the game. Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, Graceful Charity, Confiscation. I could keep going. There are so many cards that I didn't name, but 2 that are definitely at the bottom of a ranked list of spells are Polymerization and any ritual spell. For those of you who are unaware, Polymerization lets you send cards from your hand or field to the graveyard to fusion summon a monster from your fusion deck, which lists those cards as materials. And yes, it was called the fusion deck at this point. You could also have any number of cards in your fusion deck. You could just have like a 50 card fusion deck. And ritual summoning is similar. When you activate a ritual spell, you send cards from your hand or field of level equal to or greater than the ritual monster you are summoning's level to ritual summon it. Both of these mechanics are incredibly flavorful and cool, conceptually, but you should also never build a deck around them if you actually care about winning a game. Take some time to think about what has to happen for you to be able to fusion summon a monster. You have to put Polymerization in your deck and the material monsters to make the fusion. Theoretically, at this point, you could put only one material monster in your deck because there's plenty of fusion substitute monsters in the game, so you could be playing one material and one set of fusion substitute monsters. But it probably makes more sense to play both materials with fusion substitutes to maximize your chance of having all 3 cards you need in your hand or on the field to special summon a monster with marginally better stats than what a tribute summon, a cheaper and easier to accomplish task, would take. Ritual summoning is even worse in this case, as often a ritual summon will cost 4 cards in most situations, as you are probably running Sonic Bird and Senju of the Thousand Hands, monsters that, at the cost of your normal summon, search out ritual spells and ritual monsters respectively. So 2 4-star monsters, the ritual spell, and the ritual monster in your hand gets you the ritual monster on the field, and that could be Blackluster Soldier, a card with the same stats as Blue Eyes White Dragon. This is all assuming your opponent doesn't play Delinquent Duo, Confiscation, or the First Full Sentry before you actually get to activate your spell to special summon your Blackluster Soldier. Another thing about the existence of ritual and fusion monsters that really bothers me is that around half of the fusion monsters in the game are the same attack or weaker than Vorse Raider, and a third of the available ritual monsters are weaker than Summon Skull. You do all this work to entirely shape your deck and strategy around summoning your cool monster when normal summoning a monster is just better than doing that. If you want to argue with me on this about specific stat numbers, Gemini Elf with an Axe of Despair is easier to accomplish, less resource intensive, and stronger than anything but like 4 of the highest attack monsters in the game at this time. There is one slight exception to everything I've said here, and that is Relinquished. It's a ritual monster with an actual effect, and it only has 1 star, where it can steal your opponent's monsters and use their stats of the stolen monster if it's face up, or it's 0/0 if it was face down, and stealing the monster protects the Relinquished from being destroyed from 1 destruction attempt. I think playing this card in this format could be fun, and you don't get totally blown out if your opponent uses 1 card to deal with it, but it is absolutely the exception to the rule that we can observe here numerically. It simply is not worth the deck building concessions you have to make to play these kinds of cards in your deck. It's kind of funny, if you've ever seen a Yugi boomer say, "I miss when special summons were special," I think they mean when they were unplayably bad, or when the only thing they knew that could special summon a monster was Monster Reborn. Now, if you're curious and are asking, what do you mean deck building concessions? Let me show you the deck I beat this game with, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Another quick disclaimer here, I'm not claiming this is the best deck in the game, but it never lost a game in around 60-ish games with this version of the deck, including beating the national tournament and the 2 theoretically hardest opponents in the game that you get after winning nationals. So I'm confident it's fair to say this is a good deck, if not the best. It has some fun inclusions, but those are also very powerful. So let's start with the most important cards, the spells. Personally, I think playing all the most powerful spells and 3 Magician of Faith is required to have a consistently powerful deck in this format. So 1 Pot of Greed, 2 Graceful Charity, 2 Delinquent Duo, Confiscation, the Forceful Sentry, Monster Reborn, Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, Change of Heart, and Premature Burial are all automatic ends. Then the number of Dark Hole and Heavy Storm you run is debatable, but I chose 1 each because while those cards are worse than their one-sided counterparts, they are often the same cards when you're playing correctly. That is already 17 cards, by the way, and it's debatable that the most correct thing to do is find room for 3 Upstart Goblin. So now you're playing a 37 card deck. But the AI is bad enough that I prefer them not gain any life, because I was looking to complete the game as quickly as possible at this point, and the way attack values work in this format, the 1000 life points can absolutely change your lethal clock. Now let's discuss traps. This one is much easier. 1 Call of the Haunted, 3 Trap Hole because of how important the normal summon is, Mirror Force, and Solemn Judgment are the automatic ends for me, which puts us up to 23 cards. Imperial Order is also probably supposed to be here, but the AI doesn't play enough good spells for me to want to keep it in the main deck, and they don't use their spells properly anyway. Now at this point, more than half your deck is set in stone, and I've only discussed 1 playset of monsters. So let's talk about the rest. I think you should always be playing Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest at their highest numbers, which is 2 each, because consistency is key. Since you're playing 4 dark monsters already, let's play 3 Mystic Tomato. It's hard to explain how good this 7 monster package is if you haven't played dozens of games in this format, but it gives you so much consistency to react to the game state and just grab exactly what monster you need at any given time in a way that I don't think is matched by any other set of monsters. To win the game, you have your 1 Genzo and either 2 or 3 Summon Skull. That's your choice. I played 2, but I do think 3 could be defensible just so that you can naturally draw them a little bit more of the time. And that's 34-ish cards. You get 6 or 7 cards of your own taste. I don't think most of these cards are negotiable. To explain what I mean, I don't think you should, say, take out a Trap Hole for a Fisher. You want to keep your monster on the field to tribute summon, right? So if your opponent tribute summons, a Trap Hole is going to do way more than a Fisher does, most of the time, unless you have Genzo out. But if you have Genzo out, you should be finishing the game, I would say. As I'm writing the script, I realized that 6 or 7 cards is enough space for a Relinquished package, which might actually be fun. But I'd also be worried about your monster count now, because understand, Relinquished isn't a monster unless you have its ritual spell and another monster. Even though it's what I would consider the best ritual monster in the game, it still needs way too much to be usable. It's such a big ask. You know, what I do with this space is I run Cyberjar as a catch-up card, say I haven't drawn enough monsters. Cyberjar can wipe the opponent's field for me, and I can get some more advantage. I run Cyberstein as an obvious finisher, because why play 3 Blue Eyes White Dragon and a Polymerization in my deck when I could just summon Cyberstein and pay 5,000 life points and have the exact same thing, a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. When I have Jinzo out, I can just use Cyberstein to finish the game. With the remaining spaces, I play a couple Gemini Elf and Voice Raider because they manage the board well with a single normal summon, and that's it. Most of this game is either normal summon or set a monster, attack, and pass for hundreds of duels. And I'm gonna be honest, by the time I finished the game, I almost wasn't having fun. Had I not spent a week playing Exodia or had the idea to stream beating the game, I don't think I'd have ever finished the Eternal Duelist Soul just playing it by myself. I want to emphasize that I like doing fun things. My favorite decks I remember playing in the actual paper TCG were Gladiator Beasts and Blackwings around the time that people call Edison format now, and those decks were not at full power at that point, and I like coming up with my own ideas. But the cards I play have to make sense, and they have to be good, and the card pool in this particular game just really doesn't offer much of value in that regard. There are 2 things I want to take note of here. The first is I want to say I understand the game did not exist exactly like this for any significant amount of time. You know, oh no, I clickbaited you saying early Yugioh design is bad. The point of this video is not to obfuscate history. To be honest, it took me hundreds of duels to beat this game. Most likely, no one played hundreds of duels of this exact format in the paper trading card game. New cards were coming out and changing the format consistently. It's only in playing these digital snapshots of card pools that one gets trapped in the hell of the format, playing way more of it than any game designers ever intended. Although, I'm reading my script out loud, the designers of this game put the national tournament like 300 in-game days into the game. They have to have intended you for to play this game that many times, and that's wild to me, especially since they were putting out at least a game a year at this time. The second point is Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a better game now. I'll admit that I'm not at all versed in the current TCG format, and I only casually played Master Duel a few times, but people who thought the game died when Synchros or Xyz monsters were introduced have such weird logic to me. Special alternate summoning mechanics were always inherent to the greater game design of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just these first iterations were so incredibly bad. You had to not care about winning to feel compelled to play them. My intuition is that the game designers may have been worried that since a special summon is very slightly harder to interact with, they wanted to make sure those monsters weren't too powerful. But in doing so, they doomed hundreds of cards to unplayability and obscurity. And in a game without an intentional limited format, that's an egregious mistake. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh! There are so many things that you can do that are at least casually viable and powerful. And I think that's in stark contrast to this old design philosophy where almost all the power was only in a few dozen cards. There are good fusion and ritual summoning mechanics now. Hell, there's even explicit support for normal monsters that make up for the fact that they do literally nothing. I had the Yugi and Kaiba decks when they came out. I am a Yugi boomer, but nostalgia gets in our way sometimes to a harmful extent, where we want to hold on to what something used to be so much that we lose the open-mindedness it takes to experience something new, something that could be better, something where you don't have to set a 2000 defense normal monster. I've been working on this video on and off for 3 months now, writing ideas for talking points, not knowing exactly what I wanted to say. I hope I got my point across. If you like this video, please like it. If you know of any cool, powerful stuff in the Eternal Duelist Soul I may have missed, let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely interested. Also, if you want to go and experience this format I discussed in this game after this video. A Worldwide Edition, which is the game after the Eternal Duelist, so is effectively an asset flip of Eternal Duelist Soul, and it has around 200 more cards, including Torrential Tribute. So maybe try that game out, as it also has an actual story and interesting challenge duels if you end up beating the game. Otherwise, I'd say look a little farther in time for an enjoyable old Yu-Gi-Oh format. This video is very different from other things I've made on this channel, but if you like old or obscure video games, I'll probably have something more that interests you soon if I don't already. Please subscribe if that's appealing to you. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far in the video, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great day.